And we're live to discuss and review this episode of Homicide Life on the Street, and it's a good one. Over to Jeff.
And the cool thing I have to say is, technology at work, because as soon as you started the video, here on my iPad where I'm on it, then on my computer screen, my desktop in front of me that is, has my Google logged in, it popped up a thing on the bottom right of the screen saying that you were now live. So I'm in sync on two different things. It's amazing. Anyway, this is season 7, episode 12, called The Same Coin, written by David Simon, James Yoshimura, and Sharon Guskin, and directed by Lisa Cholodenko. Originally aired January 29th, 1999. And here's a bit of a summary. Gardy has a Vietnam flashback while daydreaming in a strip club. Shepard is placed back into rotation. Lewis asks Falzone to switch cases as he is still unsure about Shepard's ability to be back on the street and the part of town where their call lies. Munch and Mike work a case where the victim was from a hit and run. One of the victim's possessions is a knife that has some meaning for Gardy, who later is able to recognize the tattoo found on the victim. Shepard confronts Lewis about the case switch. She and Stivers talk more after Stivers, working with Falzone, sees him go off on a potential witness. Munch and Mike find their hit-and-run vehicle, a rental SUV, whose renter claims to know nothing of the incident and says he has filed a stolen vehicle report. Munch pulls the victim's DOD file, and for good measure, Gardy's as well. Munch begins to spread doubts with the other detectives about Gardy's Vietnam experience because the file tells him that Gardy had a less than honorable discharge. A kid who has stolen the SUV comes forward with his mother apologizing for the hit and run. When Ballard asks Gardy about Vietnam and mentions Munch's name, Gardy goes to the waterfront to confront Munch. In the ensuing confrontation, Billy Lou's bass-playing hand is injured, and then Gardy tells his Vietnam story. So that's what TV.com has to say about it. Ben, what do you say?
Well, I think it was very good. I like character backstory. I think first of all, the acting was very good from I think it's Peter Garrity playing Garty. I actually liked also. There was actually a little bit of good acting there from Richard Belzer as Munch, when you sort of see suggestions that when he was actually told the actual true story by Garty, that is he tried to acknowledge that maybe he was in the wrong. When he offered him a drink at the end.
Yeah, it's about the closest Munch comes to an apology.
Yeah, and then also we had a couple of things in this episode and in the previous episode where. About Munch lying just for an effect. Do you remember when he lied about a quote from Thomas Paine? And I think Junior G said he never said that. And then there was something in this where I think he lied about someone. He talked about somebody becoming a surgeon, a plastic surgeon, and then he actually said what the real story was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought the acting was. I thought there was some nice light comedy between the OK Falzone and Ballard. So it's it's Ballard that makes the scenes with Falzone okay. I mean, I'm not somebody who's against Falzone. I just think that he is it just pales by comparison with some of the other people on the show. That's all. He's perfectly fine. And these are some random photos I've put in.
Oh yeah, that's from that Russian show that you showed me. I'm not sure how it's relevant, but it's
not relevant. I just throw it in because I find it funny. And so I like the storyline with the peach. That was a bit suggestive for the 1990s. So yeah, I like that. I liked her reaction shot there. I liked the funny bit from the mother. She only has like such a few lines, but she gets a big laugh when she said like, "Tell him you're sorry."
Yeah.
Um.
And that's one of the many things I always loved about Homicide was the ability to have an episode that has a great deal of intensity in it, but also has those comedic moments where you don't just have, some shows just would go over the top with it. Oh, this is this ultra serious episode. No one's allowed to have a laugh. And instead it's like you have these realistic moments throughout where not everybody is experiencing the same intensity.
Yeah, and getting that balance right, otherwise known as like the tone of a program. Because I remember reading something about Star Trek, and they would have something called about tone meetings, and I don't know if it was the same thing where they're talking about the overall tone of the episode. Just a slight digression. I always enjoyed the comedic episodes far more on Star Trek Voyager than their more serious episodes. It didn't quite work, in my opinion. But getting back to this, the performance was good from Peter Garrity. It was it was nice that that the story was compelling enough that they focused on it a lot. The acting was also good from Junior G. He's sort of like more coming into his own. It's sort of establishing himself as a character. It's like the audience getting more used to him by now. I didn't actually make any notes whilst I watched it. I was just going off that it all went well. Oh yes, they had that thing where they had a couple of sort of like homicide trademarks where they had something that was a lead, but it actually turned out to be something that was not really part of a grand scheme. That it turned out to be something a lot simpler. You know, when they found out it was the kid that knocked down that person there, that man there, rather than it part of an elaborate plot to do with Vietnam. It was just that something that was there that started it up because the main focus was about Garty.
Yeah, and even though you didn't get a screenshot of that, we had another little nice scene of the medical examiner calling his assistant Igor about how he's been trying to create life.
Yes. And as folks should know, that is a Frankenstein reference. Oh, I'm going to tell people a joke from Frankenstein. Now, I was listening to the audiobook, but it was an audiobook that was very much based on the novel. And the first line that the Frankenstein's monster says is, apparently the monster meets somebody, and somebody is scared out of their wits. And you know what the guy said on the audio recording? He said, "I expected this reaction." So it's like the actual monster in the book is like very articulate and intelligent. So I wasn't expecting that at all. So Bradley, what did you think of this episode?
I thought it was definitely the best episode I've seen so far. There was a lot of nuance and it's definitely a lot of nuance, and it gave a lot of people who weren't centered to the plot opportunities to showcase their ability to act and do a lot with a little. Partly because Munch, being Munch, was able to be Munch and force people to react to him, and yeah, it did a good job of giving both G and Ballard. They had problems with his ethics of pulling the file, but they were both still pressed individually on their own because they're both they investigate. That's just what they do, and their curiosity was piqued, and it just kind of goes to show you that they had an issue with him going behind his back, which was a betrayal of trust. But once they had the file in front of them, they were sorry, it was Gia who actually read the file, and Ballard who pressed him independently when Munch was telling her about the dishonorable discharge. What was it? Dishonorable?
Well, they said general rather than
general.
So insubordination.
Insubordination.
If you're raising your gun at a senior officer, you could have been in some. But of course, they probably hushed it up a bit. I mean, because the senior officer was in the wrong.
Yeah. Also, a massive war crime.
Yeah, but these things happen when like I said, because the guerrillas were in, was it the Viet Cong were in there and attacked them from that position, and but I actually think that they covered it very even-handedly, the Vietnam War, rather than like taking a position on it that sort of like lesser programs would have done, where the writers would have like
pushed an agenda.
Yeah, you get that. You don't get an agenda with this program.
I've said many times I appreciate the fact that Homicide doesn't do that. They present the characters' perspectives and let people make up their own minds about what you want to believe about those expressions.
Yeah, I mean, and that is so refreshing, because for me, this is why I don't watch the BBC anymore, because it's like it's always pushing an agenda. Whereas this, it's like they will go to a topic and it's like they go out of their way almost, like, let's present this down the middle and make it as balanced as possible. And like a lot of show discipline from the writers. It'd be interesting to actually know if there was actually a difference between the writers' politics and what they actually wrote. So it's almost as if like you might have a situation where you would have a writer who was, say, liberal, but they knew it was better from the story point of view to be like down the middle or something. You'd have to know the writers.
I'm going blank on his name. Is it Sorkin, maybe, the West Wing creator?
Yeah, Aaron Sorkin.
Yeah, he said like he would try. Basically, he would try to present people that shared his point of view in the worst light possible, and that would deliver some of his better writing, because by nature it was like he's like, if I have a bias, then I'm going to go as much as I can in the other direction so that it pulls it back a little bit. Something like that. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was basically like he tries to show the worst side of his point of view so that it's doesn't come across as a cheesy, like he's just trying to push his point of view kind of thing.
Right.
And I would,
but
I would say I don't even think it's as much balance as it is just making the characters realistically express their point of view. So it's not even just like, okay, here's this issue and we're going to make the characters make it balanced. It's just more like, how would these characters naturally discuss these things, and they all make sense. And so it doesn't matter if the total, it's not like they're counting the total number of expressions on one side or the other of something and saying, oh, this is balanced. It's just more like, these are the realistic exchanges these characters would have, and that's what I appreciate about it. Yeah,
you're right there, Jeff. Where it's, because I've seen other things before where it's like they've tried to be balanced, and it's like they've crowbarred in positions into the characters' mouths, and it's almost become like an allegory of something else. Whereas this, it's, and again, character-based writing is the most important thing.
Yeah, because you have some shows where it's like, this character will change episode to episode based on plot convenience, because it's like, oh, we're going to tell a story about this, so we need to have a character that takes this position, so we'll give it to this character, even if it doesn't follow what previously you've seen from that character. So what I appreciate, again, about Homicide is that it's more about how would these characters react, what's consistent with their character, than it is how can we put the messages we want to tell into these characters.
Yeah, I see you're going with that. I do want to finish what I was saying though before I forget.
Go ahead.
There's lots of even the lesser lesser plot lines, like the switching the Lewis switching partners. I thought that was very good from Stivers, because I haven't seen much of Stivers at all in the episodes I've seen. So I think her throwing Falzon off of the guy was I've never seen her do anything. I've never seen her do anything that active. So that was kind of nice to see her in her element. And also when she was talking to I forgot her name.
Shepard.
Yeah, Shepard, exactly. Talking to Shepard about the liberties that the men took without consulting them first, and the way she said what gives them the right, and Shepard's reaction to that, I think, was a very genuine actor reaction to. She kind of she sort of smiled after she said that. I think she called them bastards or something like that, but she had a very genuine reaction, because I think Stivers, I don't know the actor name, but the actress name, but I think when she said what gives them the right, it came from a very real place of being sort of, I guess, oppressed by males in general. But it sort of, I think, it wasn't, it came from a real place, but I think she did a good job of portraying the characters, outrage at sort of having to deal with first not being told about the case swap, and also having to save a bystander from a fellow officer's own aggression. And her response to that was just kind of like, what are they thinking? And even the way she said, what gives them the right, very very much stuck out in my mind, because I think she did a very good job of portraying the frustration, and did a lot with very little. And I really enjoyed sort of that part of the episode, because that was kind of the head of that. Like, I don't think they talked about. Oh wait, no, Shepard consulted Lewis as well about I heard you on the phone. That wasn't the call that we took. That was Falzone's call. Like, I'm not an idiot, sort of thing. Like, just sort of the small things like that, where it's not significant to the main plot, but it's very significant to the character development. And I think those situations are very well handled on Homicide.
Tony Lewis is the actress that plays Stivers.
So that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed Falzone, John Cedar, I think the actor's name is. Falzone's object work with the peach. I enjoyed that. Like, I enjoyed Ballott's reaction, but I also enjoyed him just he went to town on that thing. Yes, I was pretty impressed about how it was obviously a metaphor. The peach is obviously a metaphor, and I'm surprised. I think, was it Ben who says, I can't believe they got away with doing that? But it was clearly sexual.
It's great because it's a way to give us some insight into the experiences of the characters without things that they can't show on network television. So it's like, here's a way of showing this part of their relationship. But the thing is, what I know from hearing enough commentaries of writers and producers on TV shows is they probably made it much more explicit script, because they know we're going to send them back and say they have to change it. So they make it more that way to begin with, and then they end up having a compromise that's what they really wanted to do in the first place. But they intentionally make it worse to begin with, because they know the censors are going to say, no, you can't do that. So they have this little back and forth with the network.
Yeah, it's sort of like haggling down a price.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be interesting to know how they wrote it originally, because it probably was more explicit than what was ended up in the episode.
Right. So yeah, I think there wasn't more from them or their relationship besides that one scene, I don't think. So that was yeah, I thought that was pretty gratifying. Doing a lot with a little sort of thing. And on the note of Falzone sort of kind of being there, I think it's just he's barely in his element because I say this show being SJ dominated, but I think it's not really. It's more evident whenever Falzone's around because it's just so against his temperament, and he's essentially being expected to act like an SJ while not actually being one. So whenever he's able to do that thing with the peach, it's just kind of him being in his element. I think that's just an SP doing what an SP does, and he doesn't often get to do that on the show. So
yeah, and I think that was one of the things when Frank Pimilton was still on the show, that there were those elements where when they would show him do things that if you just sort of I don't know, if you just looked at his character from some of his more memorable scenes, somebody would say, oh, he's this ultra serious guy, he doesn't have fun or whatever. But then there's plenty of moments where he did, and he even explained at one point what gave him the biggest rush was when he was in the box and knew he just got somebody to confess. That was like his biggest thrill. So you have that's what another good thing about the show in terms of when you have realistic characters is you can see different elements of the types, and when it comes to like showing SP characters, that they don't all get something out of the same thing, if you know what I mean. Like their interests or what gives them that rush is different. So another thing I like about it is you see those confrontations, and then of course you have the SJNT confrontation with Munch and Gardy, and that kind of comes to a head with Gardy and his SJ-ness, or whatever you want to call it, being able to quote chapter and verse of battalions and dates and all the temperature and just everything, every element factually of that experience. And of course we're aided by the show showing the visuals of it as he's describing it. But
right.
you have in there the ultimate confrontation of somebody who is laying out the facts but still has the emotions behind it because he was there and he knows the experience, versus someone who was not in the situation he's describing but had very strong opinions about the war and everything, not only at that time but everything that came since then, not just what happened to his friend, but in terms of the interpretation of all those events and all the politics involved and everything else. So you have them sort of representing a lot of things up against each other, and having it come out in a way that once again is satisfyingly unsatisfying, because again it's another thing where I think a lot of shows would have had them like shaking hands or hugging or something at the end. Instead, you don't have that. You have that amount of uneasiness still there between the two of them that have just had this, and even between Guardian, Ballard, and Billy Lou, says, don't ever talk to me again. You have these lingering things that are not just, oh, everything's fine at the end of the episode because they finally got this out. It's like, you don't know for sure if everything's going to be fine, but it was still an intense moment that it all came out.
Right. I think, he did thought he did a very good job of sort of being pushed, over and over by Munch, and then in the end, eventually, coming clean. And he's entirely. I mean, he's still annoyed. Like, obviously, he didn't want to fight Munch anymore, but he was still annoyed with everyone. Like, Ballard was like, yeah, you did good. No, you did the right thing, and then he was just like, kiss my ass. Like, I don't care. Like, I already knew I did the right thing. It's just that you didn't know, and you suspected I might have done something awful. So, but yeah, their relationship is not good at the end, and
yeah, in a way, that bit of it actually harkens back in the fourth season when Kellerman was on. He had the thing where he was accused of taking bribes in the arson squad, and once he was exonerated, he said, you know, basically you're all going to think of me as dirty, even though I wasn't, because I got accused of it. So it's similar in that aspect, in that Gardy's kind of saying, well, you know, you started forming these thoughts about me regardless of knowing the facts, and now that you know the facts, you know, it's still there, you know, that you didn't trust me in the first place.
Exactly.
What I like is that it took a while setting this up. So you had the initial competition between Munch and Garty over the affections of Billy Lou, the character on screen. And then you had Garty talking about his days in Vietnam. And then you had Munch. And then you had an episode where Munch was like going on about that and about why you were talking about that, and like then questioning whether he actually served in Vietnam or not. And so it all like they planned it out in an arc plot to like reach this moment. So it's going to be this, because he really does like Billy Lou, does Garty, and that's one of the reasons why he went through with the divorce with his wife, I think.
Yeah, we didn't even mention that that revelation that they were saying that they're engaged, because they didn't actually show that on screen. So.
Oh right, yeah.
So that's extra stuff that would just anger Stewart about.
Yeah, it's just all those little elements that have been building up, and then he pushes them too far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that's all. Yeah, I think that's pretty much. You talked about most of the episode, or all of the episodes. So I don't think there's anything. I think I said what's new too.
Ben, was there anything you wanted to say about Lewis and Shepard, about their conversations, or because we talked a little bit about that last week with, you know, what was Lewis's intention in putting the hat on her desk and stuff like that, and we had her sort of confronting him about that. And
yeah, that was
go ahead.
Yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, but it didn't. That was a little bit more of like a writer's trick in hindsight to get more attention. Like Lewis didn't really follow through with like pushing her on that.
Well, and to me, that kind of what he's saying. You know, what he said was like believable to me, because it was just more of a spontaneous action rather than he was really trying. And I said that last week, but I said there was, you know, this was kind of the situation where he's directly asked about it, and you could say, well, maybe he's being defensive, but I believe him when he says, you know, he wasn't actually trying to send any kind of message, that she's reading more into it than really was there.
That is a thing, and I think that is something that NFs need to understand, is that not everything has a purpose to it. It's like a grand purpose. Sometimes it's just done in the moment and an instinct, and it's not a central motivation of the person that you can use as an insight into their character.
Well, now, it's not just NFs either. I mean, there's plenty of SJs who will do that, where because there's a certain like expected protocol for certain things, and if somebody deviates from that, they feel like there's a reason for this. There's some kind of purpose behind this, or there's some kind of you know, thing they're trying to indicate to me without actually coming out and saying it. And the thing is, with SPs is like there's always that, you know, I've said it many times on many of my videos, but the answer to the question why is because I felt like it, you know, 99% of the time. Is that's what felt right to do in that moment, as opposed to there's any kind of planned, you know, thing behind it.
Wow. That can infuriate, especially an ESTJ. It's like, well, I felt like this. Boom.
Yeah, but it's the truth most of the time.
Now, this actually ties in, folks, with a discussion that Bradley and I were having before this hangout started, where we were actually talking about motivation versus behavior. And you see what I mean, Bradley? Like how it can change according to like each temperament, like can have its own view about motivation, and that for NFs, and I think Linda Bowens wrote that NFs in general are motivation focused.
Yeah, I say that's true. But the whole thing about NFs wanting there to be like a huge, like grand, all-encompassing or some sort of large kernel of truth, is it's sometimes in my experience, sometimes it's the case, some other times it's just not, because that there are too many. There were too many actions and motivations to keep track of.
Yeah, but we were talking about Enneagram. I mean, there's your kernel of truth. Like we had a whole hangout yesterday. It's like, oh, he did this because he's an Enneagram.
Yeah.
So it's like, and Catherine herself said, there's a little bit of digression, folks, but she herself said that loads of the people attracted to the Enneagram are NFs, and she tried to get people of different Enneagram types who weren't NFs because she knew that there was a bias in her studies. Do you remember that, Bradley? That she was trying even to get like, and she mentioned ISTJs, like she was trying to get ISTJs.
I mean, I don't remember it, but I think it's pretty self-evident that a typology tends to be an intuitive playground, and Enneagram tends to be an NF playground. So, I mean, to me, that's really obvious. And of course, it's great that Jeff can be in a video and be in a video with multiple intuitives, and especially any intuitives at the time, just kind of sit there and we can go down our rabbit holes, and he just kind of sits there.
Yeah, but part of that, though, is because, as Jeff has said before, and I remember certain quotes of Jeff better than others, like one of them is, I'm not interested in psychology, I'm interested in people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's true of me as well. That I'm interested in, I've never been interested in psychology, but typology instantly, not even instantly, it took me a while to sort of get into typology, because there's a bunch of like superficial MBTI. It's kind of like don't really get into like temperament and cognitive functions, and that's sort of like all of the nuance that lies beneath the surface is very much lost on half the people who talk about MBTI type, and just kind of have a very shallow understanding. So it took me a while to sort of get past like the superficial stuff and actually get into what it actually means to be a type and have functions.
Yeah.
And I was never into psychology because it never really focused on the people. Like it really very much focused on the idea of people, and that was extremely off-putting to me. And once I sort of got beyond that, that's when I really started getting interested in it. But yeah, I'm not really interested in stuff beyond typology or people-centered psychology. Like as long as it's focused on the people and their and not so much in their stuff that's really far removed from people, which I think especially a lot of academic work tends to be like really far removed, I think. And that stuff I'm really not interested in that much.
Right, so we digressed a little bit on this episode, but there because we talk about like Lewis and his motivations stuff. But I'll just say that this is a good book, Opposites Attract, because it has good things to say on the dichotomies used in MBTI. And so, for example, it will talk about, say, different relationships between what is a relationship like between an extrovert and an introvert, and between perceivers and between sensors and intuitives, and then all the other relationships you can have according to the dichotomy is, and it's a fun book written by Rennie Barron. She usually has quite music things on there.
Yeah.
But getting back to this episode, and so as you said there that about you can get good MBTI books where but getting back to this episode, I think I'm going to give this episode, I think I'm going to give it a 10 because of the story.
Ooh, that's pretty rare. Pretty rare.
Yeah, that's pretty rare for me.
Yeah, there were even bikinis in this one.
Yeah.
Well, there was
Well,
in the
briefly,
first one.
yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I was saying. There was in the very first scene.
In the first scene.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and check my archives, but I think Ben may have only given like 1 or 2 10s before in Homicide. So.
Yeah, and usually it's because if you've got like a good character revelation and stuff, and some good acting, and so you got the good acting from Stuart, from Peter Garrity as Stuart Garty, and I always like revelations and stuff. And they also, it looked like they got a good younger actor with a similar face to play him.
Yeah,
like,
they did. I
Yeah.
noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah, another good casting job by Homicide is even when a part that small, they still were. It's important to have a realistic young Gardy.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things going forward, what I would say to people is get the casting director in Homicide. Right?
Yeah.
They were good casting. Just like they tended to have good casting in Seinfeld.
Well, if we're giving ratings now, I'll have to give mine a 10 out of 10 as well, because there wasn't any point. I was thoroughly engaged with this episode. Normally, there are some episodes where there's not a whole lot going on, and even though I'm still engaged, I'm not like actively engaged and just kind of like waiting for something else interesting to happen. But there wasn't any of that in this episode, and even the small stuff I was really impressed with, and I think it was a well spent 43 minutes or whatever. And it's not very often that something can hold my attention that thoroughly. So when it does, so it's something else. So I'll give it a 10.
Well, for the most part, I echo the same sentiments. I really enjoyed the episode, and it's got a lot of little details and a lot of things packed into the period that make it, it's well paced and has a lot of things going on without anything, seeming out of place or taking you out of the episode. So it's definitely one of the better season 7 episodes. If there's anything I could criticize, it would be the guy who played the dude who rented the car that they had. He seemed, I wouldn't say unrealistic, but just a little bit less on the level of the people that he was working with.
Right.
And the little side conversations with Stivers and Shepard, again, it's like, I understand things like that, but it sort of takes away from the overall feeling of the episode, I think, to me, because it's like, again, Shepard seems out of place to me, and so it just seems like Stivers, I don't know, maybe if they had explored her thinking of, maybe Stivers had a similar feeling about Shepard, almost, rather than it being just a females versus males thing. I liked back when Russert and Howard had a little confrontation where you could tell there was a little bit of jealousy on the part of the two female cops, because they sort of didn't necessarily view it as us against them, but kind of like, I'm being judged on what you do kind of thing too. So I thought that was a little bit better than this, but it's still a really good episode and a lot more good than bad. So I'd give it a 9 out of 10. And so that means we got 2 10s and a 9. And join us next week for perhaps the worst episode of Homicide. I don't know. Once in a while, I'll make up my mind again about that. But anyway, next week's episode is called Homicide.com.
Oh.
So it gives you an indication already the title was dumb, so, you know.
Well, you know, it's got some NT appeal. I'm thinking, oh, what could happen?
Yeah, well, you may like it better than I did. I don't know. We'll see.
Right, okay. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.
Let's stop.